My name is Emmie Wienhoven, and I'm a project manager at Royal Dutch Cantalis. Our work at Cantalis is both in the Netherlands and internationally. In the Netherlands, we have diagnostics, care and education for people who are deaf, hard of hearing and deaf-blind, as well as those with complex communicational needs or SLI. Some of our work is international, and that's where I work, at the international department. And I'm happy to share with you today some of our work on literacy for deaf and hard of hearing children in Tanzania and Uganda. We have a pilot project in which there's 4 phases, and those 4 phases together hope to improve or aim to improve the literacy skills of deaf and hard of hearing learners. First of all, we have a developmental stage. In that stage, we develop a method for teaching deaf and hard of hearing learners to read. This method is based on work done by my colleague Kika Mereboer for the Tanzatoto Foundation some years back already, and she developed practical skills for teachers to help children acquire reading more efficiently and more effectively. We took this practical guide and we added the theoretical background and made it a very strong and robust resource book for teachers that helps them both theoretically during training, but also in their classroom in planning their lessons. The second phase of the project involves training, and there we train reading coaches and teachers in the method. And this was a fantastic way of seeing what works and what doesn't work. And that allowed us to take those lessons back into the developmental stage. So these things don't necessarily happen one after another. We do them back and forth almost, because it's very much a dialogue. Also with the implementation, teachers took what they learned to their classroom and they received coaching from the reading coaches. And that allowed us to see what works well, what doesn't work so well, where teachers might need some extra support, where we might have given them too much support and needed to focus on something else. It also allowed us to incorporate some pictures of the materials that teachers were making in their classroom and incorporate them in the book so that for other teachers, they could look at their work of their colleagues and really get a sense of, I can do this too, because it is not that complicated as I maybe beforehand thought it was. Finally, we have a research and documentation phase. Throughout the project, we tried to document as much of what we were doing and really aim for lessons for the future and lessons for other practitioners so they could use our work and continue it and take their lessons from it in the future. But also for ourselves, what do we need to strengthen? What do we maybe need to change if we want to do a national rollout? The project runs in Uganda and in Tanzania, and that's relevant because these 2 countries teach reading in 2 different languages. In Tanzania, there is primary education instruction in Kiswahili. And that means that children learn to read in Kiswahili. In Uganda, children learn to read in English. And we really wanted these 2 countries because it allowed us to show that the reading skills or our method doesn't depend on this particular language difference. The skills work, the method works, regardless of the language of reading. Now, there is one request that we make to teachers and to our partners, and that is to start teaching reading in the language of primary education. Because what we see a lot happening for hearing children, and this is a really good development, is where they teach in the first few years in the home language, in the mother tongue. And the idea is that kids come to school with language skills already. And that allows them to use those language skills in their home language in learning to read. And then gradually, usually in the first 4 years, they swap to learning to read in English, where English becomes the full language of instruction. Now, for deaf children, this isn't a transferable skill. Being able to read in one language doesn't necessarily help you or help you as much as it does for hearing children. So that's the only request that we make. But whether it is English or Kiswahili or any other language, the method is the method. So I want to talk a little bit about the diverse group of deaf and hard of hearing learners in these two countries and what these classes are comprised of and what teachers are faced with when they're teaching these kids. Now, first of all, these children don't come to school until they're 6, maybe 7, sometimes 8 or 10. And that means, especially if they're deaf, that they haven't had any language access or full language access until they enter school at this relatively late age. Sometimes they go to nursery and they might go to school at age 5, but this is a recent development that we really hope will continue because it's absolutely fantastic, but it's not something that we can rely on at the moment. So teachers might be trained in special needs education. Actually, most of them are. And many of them have basic sign language skills. Very few are absolutely fluent. And there is a limited number of deaf teachers available in these classrooms. The thing that these teachers have not learned during their training is deaf-specific reading skills. So they try to teach reading the same way to deaf and hard of hearing learners as they do to hearing learners. And I'll talk a little bit about the difficulty of that later, but this is key in why our project is so innovative and so new in a sense and so important, because it's the first time that we really look at reading as a specific skill for deaf and hard of hearing learners where we need specialized trained teachers. Now, the children in these classrooms are not one group. They're not all the same. Some of them are deaf, some of them are hard of hearing, varying from mild to severe hearing loss, and also the age at which they became deaf or hard of hearing differs greatly. Also, their home situation differs. Same as here, very few children have deaf parents, so will have grown up with sign language, and the majority has hearing parents. But those hearing parents have a variety of languages that they speak and use at home as well. Now, the difference, if a child only comes to school, say at age 6, the difference between a child who was deaf from birth or who became deaf at 4 or 5 is huge. Because a child who became deaf later in life already has language skills. And this is a real challenge for teachers in the classroom because they have such a diverse group that they're trying to teach. And they have to cater to all these children. So we try to make them aware of these differences. And many of them are already aware, but we really look at what are the implications for your teaching. And this is something that they found hugely helpful in trying to teach their learners and in teaching them effectively. So what are we talking about when we talk about teaching literacy, and specifically teaching to read? We're using the simple view of reading, and that states that decoding times linguistic comprehension equals reading comprehension. And I want to talk a little bit about what these different words mean. And for some of you, this might be known, but for some of you, it might not. And because our project kind of depends on it, I do want to go through it. So, hearing children learn to read by connecting sounds to letters. They know that the letter A is connected to the sound A. And this is different in different languages, but they learn that connection, and that means that they're able to decipher what this combination of letters sounds like. And that is the skill that we call decoding. So literally translating these little scribbles on paper to sounds. Now, these combination of sounds for hearing children with knowledge of the spoken language directly sound of words that they've already heard in their life. So this is their linguistic comprehension, their knowledge of the language that is activated immediately and works during this process of decoding to help predict and eventually come up with the right word that is the word that they're trying to read. So by being able to turn these letters into sound, so by decoding, and by those sounds having meaning, because you have linguistic comprehension, you know what you read. And that means that you've achieved reading comprehension. Now for deaf and hard of hearing children, this is slightly different. Because if you have challenges hearing those sounds, you have not a solid basis, or you do not have a solid basis to link these letters to. So you see the letters, nothing wrong there, or no challenges there, but you can't link them to sounds that you know. So they don't hear, because they don't hear as much as their hearing peers. So if you can't decode, you end up with a sort of a scramble of letters that turn into a scramble of potentially some sound, maybe some mouth movements, but you also don't have full knowledge of the spoken language in which you're trying to read. So then in that process, you don't have anything to really connect it to. And this means that your path to learning to read, sort of linking letters to sounds, knowing the language, and then knowing what you read, is really affected by not hearing those sounds fully. So when we look at the scribble at the last, at the bottom of this slide, these are actually Greek letters. And maybe some of you took Greek in school, I didn't. But imagine that you're trying to read this and you have no recollection or no knowledge of the Greek alphabet. You can probably, if we give you the key between the Greek letters and the letters that we're used to reading, you'll probably end up reading the following word. That's this one. Now, this is a word in Dutch, and it's pronounced gezellig. Gezellig. Great. Now you know that it is gezellig. If you're trying to pronounce this, it probably sounds completely different because you're approaching this with your decoding skills from English, most likely. But you still don't have linguistic comprehension of Dutch. So what this word means, what this scribble means, even if you're able to decode it to something that sounds or looks familiar to you, it's not familiar yet, because you don't have the linguistic comprehension of Dutch. It means, it's a very specific Dutch word. It means something like cozy, but it's also something that if you're with a group of friends and you're having fun, that could be gezellig. It's a get-together, it's homely, it's comforting. It's a very particular word. If you ever visit our country, I'll help you out there. So, what does this mean for the situation in which teachers are in trying to teach deaf and hard of hearing children to read in Uganda and Tanzania? And what does this imply for what they might need? And what does it imply for children? Teachers need to understand why they're running into problems. So they need to understand why their deaf and hard of hearing learners struggle with learning to read as much. Because teachers are trained and teachers try their absolute best, and still they don't see results in their kids that they're trying to teach, which is hugely frustrating. So we have to help them overcome that by explaining why that is. And then we have to give them the skills by which they're able to actually teach their deaf and hard of hearing learners to read in a specific way, in an effective way. So once they have the theory and once they have the skills, they also need the materials. And we are looking for a sustainable way of offering teachers these 3 key points. So both the theory, the skills, and the materials. So that means that we're coming up with tools for teaching, or the reading method. And the reading method contains 3 key points. Tools for teaching, so what are you doing when you teach? Tools for language, because without language you can't learn how to read, so we need to build language skills first. And then tools for reading. So although we focus on reading, this is really the third step that we're coming to. And this book contains the theory, the skills, and ways to make materials on these key three aspects. Now, in our training, we offer teachers the theory, so they can really make informed decisions on why they change their teaching from the existing curriculum to something that is more fitting to their learners. So they're able to make a decision on what to do for this deaf child who was born deaf, and make another decision for a hard of hearing child that maybe lost some hearing at age 4. Because they will need slightly different approaches and slightly different support and skills from the teacher, so that teachers can make these informed decisions. We offer them the skills. So our trainings, and I know this sense, I'm a bit biased, but they're a lot of fun because we work on these skills with them. We role play, we practice, we allow teachers and ourselves to make mistakes. We talk about them, and we really create an environment that allows teachers to gain those skills and leave our training with confidence. Deaf and hard of hearing children need different materials for learning, and they need more of them. For example, stories. We need loads of stories at different levels for children to learn to read effectively. That means that teachers need to be able to make those materials, because it's not sustainable for a teaching material production company to produce that many of them. So by giving teachers these skills, they can create the materials themselves, they can share them among their colleagues, and they can really gain that confidence to be able to do it themselves, and have the material that is relevant for them and for their learners. Then we work on consolidation. Our reading coaches are trained in video interaction guidance. And that is a coaching method in which the coaches video the teachers, and together they look at what goes well. And that consolidates the skills that we're trying to teach during our training. And in research from the Netherlands that is done at Kentalis shows that this coaching is particularly important when doing a training such as these. That these types of coaching actually is one of the things that increases the efficacy of what you're trying to do. So here's some examples of our tools for teaching. These are pictures made at our training in Tanzania. And on the top corner, you see the little baskets that teachers have made. We learned, and this is a big learning point for us, because it's a pilot, and I'm a big fan of learning, and then taking that on board and changing what we were doing, and that's a gift of this project. We realized that the way in which people gave feedback was in a negative way, to show, I can tell you what you didn't do right, and that way you know what you need to do differently next time, and I've shown that I do know what you need to do. Sadly, that's not really how feedback works. Feedback is most effective when it's specific and aimed at learning, and when it's positive. If you give feedback and you give negative feedback, you need 4 positive points of feedback to level it out and let people leave with a sense of achievement and confidence. So in order to give feedback effectively, you're better off focusing on the positive, and you need to be very specific and have to rig your feedback for learning. So tell people what they've done right and how they can do that again, so that people will do that again in their daily life. So we came up with a strategy where we allowed everybody to give feedback to each other, to really practice these things. And this feedback was given out anonymously, and we're put in these little baskets. Everybody folded their own basket to really practice with giving feedback. And it's such a fun exercise. We got the most beautiful feedback. And teachers could really experience what it's like if you get this positive feedback, and how it affects you mentally if you get positive feedback versus you're told you have to do this better next time. Now, secondly, if you see the red thread on the right of the slide, that is the learning pit from James Nottingham. And I've put the website below. And this learning pit is the idea that we all like to learn from and go from not knowing something to knowing something, from not having a skill to having a skill, and just go up like that. Doesn't happen like that. You need to fail, you need to try, you need to go back down, you need to realize that it's really difficult. And then you can sort of work your way out to mastery of a certain skill or a theory. And we really worked with teachers on this. And we use this tool and this view of learning to work with them and for them to be able to apply it to their classroom. So that's the tools for learning. So those can be applied to any classroom. It's not deaf specific at all, but it is just a general a view of learning that is important to build a positive atmosphere in your classroom. Now, the tools for teaching can actually be divided up in two bits. There's the tools for language, and there's the tools for reading. And you have to do one first before you can go to the other. And the first bit is really focused, the tools for language, in building those sign language skills with children. And then for reading, we add words and texts later on. So this is a combination of the book written by my colleague Kika, which was already based on Dutch methods, and methods that we use at Kentalis, or that we have used in the past, that really prove really effectively for teaching deaf and hard of hearing children. And these consist of several steps, and we work with teachers through these steps and really teach them the order in which to do things and the importance of doing things in a certain order. Now, some things are really hard for all of us, because I fail at these during trainings constantly, but, learning pit, so I fall back into my pit and I have to climb back out again. One of the key learnings that we have is that you teach first and you interact later. We see a lot of interaction that starts early, which on paper sounds great, but often looks like if you're trying to teach the word for apple or the sign for apple, and none of the kids know the apple or the sign for it, and you show them the apple and then they start asking, what is this? And we really want to get them to a point where they tell children, this is an apple, or an apple, however you sign it. This is an apple. I'm teaching you this, and then moving to interaction. So writing stories, that's a second point. Writing stories and creating meaningful context was another one. Teachers loved writing stories, and some of them struggled and some were magnificent from the start, because a part of it is talent and interest. But really creating that meaningful context through stories and writing these stories together with a clear beginning, a beefy middle, and a clear ending really was a skill that teachers loved to learn. Now, fingerspelling, So the third point is linking words to sign language, pictures, and real objects. This is something that teachers picked up immediately. So as soon as we gave them a structure in which to do that, by sandwiching, for example, the word for apple with the sign for apple, and again, the word for apple, that really gave them structure and allowed something they already knew, namely that kids need these visual this visual information, and that children need sign language, and that real objects are great. And we combined it together into an effective teaching strategy. We saw a lot of fingerspelling, but one of the key points was really that fingerspelling is a way to remember the order of the letters. So in a word. So often people would start with fingerspelling and use it as a meaning-giving activity, while it's not. The function of fingerspelling is to give a better connection or a better understanding of the letters and remembering, almost like muscle memory, which letters come first in a word. We got a lot of questions on pronunciation and lip reading. And what for us was really important is the diversity in the classroom, and to make sure that teachers didn't frustrate kids, but also realized that, again, that muscle memory and practicing to pronounce words can help children with remembering words later, and retrieving words from memory. And for those who are hard of hearing, specifically, it's a skill that is important for them, or it's one of the skills in their toolbox that they have in communicating with others. So really using, again, like fingerspelling, using those tools effectively. Now, the final point that was key for many teachers was the need for more stories and visual materials for deaf and hard of hearing learners. We need a multitude of stories. We need a multitude of visual materials. And by allowing teachers to build their catalog or build their library of visual materials and their library of stories during our training, and we're looking at also continuing that collaboration after our training between teachers to really allow them to have the materials that they need to teach and make it part of their lesson preparation. Now, I talked about this earlier, the video interaction guidance and the reading coaches. The reading coaches have been part of this plan from the beginning. Ideally, eventually, we as Centalis are no longer part of this project or part of a follow-up of a project or after that, however this goes. But the reading coaches and those trained in Uganda and Tanzania can carry this on and have the knowledge to train more people and to support more people in teaching reading for deaf and hard of hearing learners. And reading coaches are key. The reading coaches have more theoretical knowledge, can support teachers in the classroom and offer video interaction guidance. So these reading coaches received original training and did the teacher training with us. So they were co-trainers for our teacher training. The video interaction guidance was a lot of fun and gave them a really great framework to support teachers and allow teachers to feel confident in front of their classroom, and also shifted the way in which people felt about their own teaching. We had teachers who were afraid to come after the video was taped during their lesson to talk with the coach. And then as soon as the conversation started, they got a smile on their face and they realized it was a positive experience and they were being uplifted and empowered, and were just like, this is wonderful. And that really changed the dynamic. And that allows reading coaches to provide this additional support and effective support. We tried as much as possible to use existing infrastructure. In Uganda, we used the trainers and the tutors at primary teacher colleges, and in Tanzania, we used lecturers at Amukta University. And by using existing infrastructure, we're not trying to build something out of the blue from the ground up. We give people already tasked with this responsibility of supporting teachers additional skills. And we hope that in the future, if we can continue this project, our reading coaches can become our master trainers. So what's our output? There will be a teacher's guide, which has a theoretical background and that will be used during training. We'll have a theory to practice guide for teachers to use in their everyday teaching, and a materials resource book. So teachers will have a toolbox that they can use in their classroom day to day, and that they can learn from during training and refer back to if they want to refresh some of their knowledge. We have the possibility of our reading coaches becoming master trainers and offer CPD training, so continuous professional development training, where teachers don't have to come together for 2 weeks to be co-trained by us, but the reading coaches can do outreach to the schools and go for an afternoon session, which makes it a lot more sustainable. We have blueprints for rollouts in other countries. We know this works. We've seen the atmosphere in classrooms change. We've seen the confidence of teachers change. We've seen teachers teach with joy. And this is something that we know we can replicate in other countries. And finally, we have documentation on what went well, what didn't go so well, and hopefully on outcomes in the classroom. Now, COVID-19 is our new normal, at least for now. And it has, like with everything, like this conference, affected our work. And for us, it means that the project was supposed to finish in August 2020, but will most likely not finish for a while, because there are some activities that are school-based that we can't do at the moment because schools are closed to protect the health of kids and other citizens. It also means that we're now starting to think creatively on how can we do more distant learning? How can we use this time to orient teachers on some new aspects of the material? How can we support reading coaches so that once schools reopen, teachers are ready and reading coaches are there to support them? We've also seen something quite surprising, I suppose, or something at least that wasn't expected to happen. The teachers from our pilot schools in Uganda were asked to be involved in recording some lessons to be aired on TV and on YouTube in Uganda for deaf and hard of hearing children who are stuck at home, and give them access to learning from their own home. And during this recording, they applied some of the things that they learned during our training, because some of the lessons were literacy based. And afterwards they got feedbacks like, this is really good. What happened? What are these teachers doing? This is really positive. We want this for the other teachers as well. So we really see the impact, even if it's not a literacy lesson in our classroom, but we see the work being appreciated and continued when we're not necessarily there. And we're very, very grateful for that. Obviously, we hope that we can return to a new normal, an old normal, and continue this project to put the books in the hands of the teachers and have kids back in school learning. Specifically, deaf children are vulnerable and can't benefit from, for example, audio instruction via radio. So the sooner they can get safely back to school, the better. But for now, we'll have to leave it here and see where the future takes us. On to thank you. Bedankt. If you have any further questions, of course, there's a Q&A that I look forward to later. But after that, you can also send me an email, chat on WhatsApp. Thank you for your attention. And I hope to meet in person at some point.